So President Biden is requiring federal employees to get vaccinated, and Speaker Pelosi is requiring House members to wear masks on the floor. I think this is both good policy and good politics. Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. If you share my concerns, maybe you could like this video and subscribe to this channel, and maybe even click that little bell that will notify you when I post something new. So the increasing efforts to respond to the rising Delta variant of the virus have resulted in the usual recriminations by Trumpist right-wing Republicans, saying things like, "More freedom, less Fauci." An interesting quip by Ohio Representative Jim Jordan, who of course is a defender of pedophiles, as we may recall. In response to some comments by House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Speaker Pelosi responded, once more showing why I'm such a fan of hers, "He's such a moron," which I totally agree with. I can already see the hand-wringing now, though, by some moderates saying, "Oh, we don't want to make these Trump voters angry and somehow give them an issue that they can run against us on." And I'm here to say today to our Democratic officials, don't be nervous. This is both good policy and good politics. How is it good policy? Well, the number one goal that we have to have in this country is increasing vaccination rates. One scary trend that we've seen is after a peak in about mid-April, when we were vaccinating almost 3 million people a day, the average number of doses being administered has dropped consistently down to about 608,000 doses per day now. Now, it is true that there are a number of reasons that people aren't getting vaccinated. In a declining number of cases, it could be lack of access. The government, under President Biden's leadership, has done a great job of giving access to everybody to the vaccines. Then, of course, there is the noticeable differential in vaccination rates between white communities and communities of color. And this is something that's disturbing, and I'm pleased to see that many black leaders are stepping up to the plate to really encourage their communities to get vaccinated. It's certainly understandable that these communities might have certain reservations about taking the word of our medical officials at face value. But of course, in general, then there are the people who are just anti-vaxxers generally, and there's not a whole lot that can be done about that. But research has shown that the biggest predictor of vaccine hesitancy is political ideology. Imagine that. Even as there have been efforts to try to bring some type of nuance to the understanding of who are the vaccine resistors, the fact of the matter is the largest group of vaccine resistors are basically Trump voters. And in fact, you can see a very clear correlation across the country where the higher the vote for Biden, the higher vaccination rate you have. Now, the biggest fear I think most people have is not that we might have to wear masks a little bit more, but that the economy will be thrown back into chaos again as we have to shut down as a result of some out-of-control variant of the virus. That's a real risk with nearly 50% of our population not fully vaccinated here in the United States. That level of vaccination opens the door to new variants developing that might be vaccine resistant. Fortunately, we haven't had that problem so far, but it is certainly a real risk. So what can be done about that? Well, the best approach is both a carrot and a stick approach. The carrot approach is to give money or some type of incentive for people to get vaccines. A great example of that was done in Ohio, where they offered a $1 million prize to somebody who'd gotten vaccinated. That certainly encouraged people to get vaccinated, and there's evidence to prove that. In another approach, New York has taken to actually giving $100 to everybody who gets a vaccine, which certainly would be an encouragement. One proposal which I supported early on was that rather than just sending out checks to everybody as a result of the first COVID relief package, that we would actually essentially pay people to get vaccines. That once they get the vaccine, they'd get their COVID relief check. That approach, though, was not taken by the government, obviously. And now we find ourselves in a situation that's kind of difficult because the fact that so many people have received the vaccines, if you give some type of incentive to those who haven't, you're basically rewarding people who didn't go and get the vaccines early on. So we have to shift over to the stick. Now, some might say that having a stick approach is only going to make people mad, but it's actually shown itself to be incredibly effective in changing people's behavior. For example, the most effective steps we've taken to get people to reduce their smoking has not been to warn them of the dangers of smoking or to put warnings on the packages. They've been to do things like increase the taxes on cigarettes so they get more expensive and require people to smoke outside so it's inconvenient. If we make things inconvenient for people, they're less likely to engage in them. And that's a pretty simple premise of economics. Well, essentially what President Biden and these other leaders seem to be doing is trying to increase the inconvenience of not being vaccinated and not wearing a mask. And in so doing, people might say, oh, forget it, I'm just going to get the vaccine so I can be done with it. And that end result is something positive for the country, because then it reduces the potential for new variants developing that might infect people all over again and create a shutdown of the economy again. So now, why is this good politics? Well, it's good politics because, number one, a majority of people in the country, by a pretty substantial margin, have gotten at least one shot. And indeed, in virtually every state that President Biden won, you've got more than 50% of the population having gotten at least one shot. The only exception to that, interestingly enough, is Georgia, which President Biden, as we all know, won by a very narrow margin, but has only about 45% of the population who've received at least one shot. Now, that differential could be due to a number of factors. It could include the larger black population that Georgia has, or the large percentage of incredibly motivated ideologues who also live in parts of Georgia. At any rate, though, that state is notable because of how different it is. In most places, a larger percentage of people have received at least one shot than voted for President Biden. Now, there are some states that stand out as notably having a substantially higher percentage of people who've received at least one shot than voted for President Biden. Let's talk about some of those states. They include Pennsylvania, for example, which, of course, President Biden narrowly won. They include Maine, which, interestingly enough, divides up its electoral votes by congressional district. It has 2 congressional districts, and one of those congressional districts was won by President Biden. One of them was won by former President Donald Trump. Similarly, you also have Nebraska, which also divides up its electoral vote by congressional district. Then there's New Hampshire and Florida, one state which President Biden narrowly won, one state which he narrowly lost. And in each of these cases, the differential between the percentage of people who've received at least one shot and the percentage of people who voted for President Biden is a margin of 9 points or more, with some reaching as high as 16 points. Now, if we assume that people who've received at least one shot are people who care about their health and the health of the community as a whole, and if this split really hardens up between Republicans who are opposed to any kind of health measures and Democrats who are trying to address the virus, then that should actually leave room for us to improve in a number of these key states. And what's notable, there's not a single state that was close that has a lower percentage of vaccinated than voted for President Biden. The states that come closest to that distinction would be my home state of Michigan, where 53% of the people have received one vaccination, and North Carolina, where 51% have. Even in Texas, a majority of the population have received at least one vaccination. And again, given their behavior, it appears that people who've received the vaccination are probably fertile prospects for the Democrats. What's more is that there's a growing sense among people who've been vaccinated of anger against those who are refusing to get vaccinated because of the threat that they are causing to the rest of us and to the country as a whole. That anger was very well expressed in an article in the Atlantic Monthly, which I'll link to down below, as I always do. But I've also seen it in other places as well. To the extent that people can distinguish themselves as either pro-safety, by either wearing a mask or having some type of evidence of vaccination, versus being anti-safety, that will be something that will only increase the motivation then of Democrats to be able to go out and vote. After all, the biggest risk that the party in power has during the midterm presidential elections is not that people vote against their party, but that the voters of the president's party are less likely to turn out to vote. After all, they're satisfied. Their guy, unfortunately, always a guy, is the one who's in the White House, right? But if we essentially put on the ballot in the 2022 election the safety of America against the coronavirus, that will be something that will motivate people who are vaccinated and who are overwhelmingly Democrats to go out and actually vote. So while we may hear lots of complaining and gnashing of teeth about vaccination requirements or mask mandates, remember that these are both good policy because they will actually encourage people to get vaccinated and behave safely, and they're good politics by reminding people of the reason why we want the Democrats in charge and encouraging Democrats to get out and vote in the 2022 election. Well, if you agree with me or disagree with me, I'd love to hear your comments down below. Also, if you could like this video and subscribe to this channel, that'd be a huge help. I'll see you in the next video. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.